Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Oh my goodness. Had a great day of learning, of learning
A great day of learning.
for myself.
But that would portend that you won't learn anything when you're with me. See, that's just that's
Yeah, I'm
just
full up. I'm done.
that's just ugly.
I am completely full of knowledge.
You're
right now.
complete. Yeah, you're completely full. All right, I'll agree with that.
Oh, today was the day. Holy cow. What is with the bus drivers? I mean, I think they've got the full moon syndrome. Oh my goodness.
It's a it's a terrible time, and I've told you that one of the things that I'm adamant about is that you folks have a better clinical experience than I did. How many years ago was my clinical experience? 20, 30, 35 years ago, 36 years ago. Some of you are, and you don't have to raise your hand, some of you are old enough to remember when we stopped using student drivers to drive the school buses and we had to employ adult drivers. So the year of my clinical internship, all I did was run the bus lot because I had to find adults to get them through their drug test and CDL and all that business and get them all these folks to drive buses. And you can imagine our first go around, the quality of people that we got in that first go around getting adult drivers, because that wasn't a thing. And we, just like you're talking about, it was like full moon every day, all day. We would hire two and fire one every week. That didn't know that you curse around kids, or you couldn't stop and smoke, or smoke on the bus, or have a I think back to School of Rock, the movie, and the substitute comes in and he's all hung over, and they start teasing him about being drunk, and he says, "No, I'm not drunk, I'm hung over. That means I was drunk yesterday." Well, that's kind of the deal with the bus drivers. Everything that could go wrong with that bunch went wrong. Some of them didn't even have their regular license had been revoked and didn't tell us. I mean, it was just, but their behavior, oh my Lord, people that didn't know anything about being around school age kids and how bad they acted on the bus and all this stuff. Oh, it was just a nightmare. I first to admit, I never went in one classroom the whole year that I was a clinical intern. I never went, not one time. It was morning, noon, and night I was doing buses. I'm talking about till dark every night and up early the next morning. It was just crazy trying to find them, having to drive them, and having to figuring out where all the hiding places were for all the coaches that was trying to hide and not drive the buses. My bunch. Yeah, it was an absolute nightmare. And so, yeah, but the good thing about when I was in CMS, we didn't have to be worried. The transportation department took care of all of that. Now, when I was in Rutherford and Burke, we had to find our own bus drivers and do that. Even when I was principal in Rutherford, I did principal in Burke. But in CMS, the transportation department handled all that deal. But it's still, it's still an issue. It's still a problem. So, yeah, bus drivers are a problem now, as are substitutes. That's an issue as well with their behavior and their preparation, but it's all part of it. But the bigger districts handle a lot of this stuff for you. I've told the story. when I was out in the rural districts, you did everything. I had hair. I wore a hairnet and served in the lunchroom line when the lunch lady was out. I swept the floor if the custodian was out. You did everything. And I couldn't believe it when you went to Charlotte. You didn't do any of that. You just wore a suit and tried to look nice. You didn't have to do any of that stuff. I mean, you didn't even have to hire and fire the custodians. You had a maintenance department that did that. Your bus drivers had a department that took care of your subs. I mean, it was wonderful. You had plenty of resources. But now the backside of that is no excuses. You got to get it done. We give you anything and everything you need, but we expect outcomes. We expect results. And that was the thing about it. I mean, your current superintendent worked over in our facilities department, and he actually was my facility person when I was a high school principal. He was a young fellow back then, and I mean, you didn't have to worry about managing construction projects or facilities. None of that stuff. It was just can you get test scores? And so that's the piece you can't miss. But I'm glad y'all are learning other things as well. You need to be well-rounded in what you do. All right, so 5, 10, 11, 12, 13, we're missing 2 tonight, but we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Mels 603. This is our next to last. So let's talk about next week. So next week, you're going to present your case studies. On your final case study, I'm going to remind you again, don't worry about where it happened. That it's not in the United States, it's immaterial. That's just there to distract you. And you can, and part of the reason why I leave it that way is you can figure out what the different roles are. I mean, they've got an instructional facilitator and those kinds of things, and you can kind of figure that out. Look specifically at what the principal did and didn't do. Look at, inclusion model, look at parents, look at FERPA, look at due process, look at all those things. Look at good instructional practice. Everything that we've covered this semester should be in that one, and I'm interested in seeing your thought process. Now, having said that, what I mean is I don't need to see 100 pages. I need to see that you're thinking legally, that you're thinking policy wise, you're thinking best practices, you're putting it all together. I mean, just like the rationale for the master schedule. Can you put all those things together? You know that federal law comes first, then state law, then board policy, and then best practices in terms of EVOS, value added, and then teacher input. Do we let teachers decide what they do and what they want to do or not do, or what we're supposed to do legally? Which comes first? That's what I'm looking for next week. Our last activity was about negligence, about what to do. If you have a bus wreck, you always call the law first. You don't call the bus garage, or you don't call back to the school. You can't delay in that 911 call. That's a liability issue. We remember or understand. Let me share my screen. The three types of negligence, and let's do that right quick. I've got it here, and this is not much of a PowerPoint. You go here. All right. Malfeasance. Willful intentional harm. Illegal act that should not be performed at all. Acting beyond the scope of duty. All right. So example is corporal punishment. Which one of our case studies did the teacher engage in malfeasance?
Bobby strikes out.
Will cheating strike Bobby out? Thank you, Daphne. I was beginning to wonder if my microphone was working. She willfully, intentionally tried to harm Bobby. She did an illegal act, no due process, zero tolerance. She violated federal and state law on Bobby. That would be malfeasance. All right. What is misfeasance?
Didn't know you're doing the wrong thing, but you did the wrong thing. Basically.
That would be if you call the bus garage and delayed in calling 911. You didn't intend to harm those children, but you delayed getting medical attention and emergency personnel on the scene. Could be an act of omission. An act of omission. You just thought it was the appropriate thing to do. You didn't intentionally mean not to delay 911, not call and delay emergency people from coming, but doesn't matter. If you did, that's what's going to happen. And then nonfeasance. Which of our case studies hit that one?
We are normal too.
We are normal too. She had a duty to act when these kids were doing the wrong thing and didn't, and let it get all just completely out of control. And so please remember, under liability, under negligence, if you have something bad happen like that, you call 911 immediately. Now, I want to talk about that same function when we talk about if we have a kid that comes in and says that she's being sexually harassed by her softball coach. That was the case study that was in your book. What would be your first response? I'm gonna pick on Megan. Megan's over there at John Chavis Middle School. Is that where you are, Megan?
Yes, I am.
He's over there at the middle school, and they've got a little middle school girls softball team, and one of the little 13-year-old girls comes in and says, my coach is sexually harassing me. What do you do, Megan?
You would immediately report it.
To who?
Well, you could Title IX. So in Gaston County, it's Judy Leahy. You would immediately report it to her, and then depending on what, I would consult with her first. You may need to call the police. You may need to speak to lawyers, but you definitely need to report it.
Okay. Now, Megan is right. You definitely need to report it. Does it matter if she calls the Title IX person first or the police first? Does it matter?
I'd call the police first.
Marcia says she'd call the law first. I would have to tend to agree with Marcia. Somebody explain to me why, even though my second call would be, now I picked Megan in the middle school for a reason. And we could talk about, we could talk about South Point with Heather. But why would you call the police first? Now, Megan, do y'all have a on-campus SRO, school resource officer?
Yes.
That would be the person I'd call on the radio. Can you come to my office ASAP? Or where are you? I'll come to you. High school, I know you have them. I didn't know about middle school. What about elementary? Do y'all just use the one at the high school, or do you have your own?
We have
our own.
Have your own. So everybody. Now, my group last night is the mixed group that's just all over North and South Carolina. Some of them had SROs and some didn't. And they think that matters. It really shouldn't. Even if you don't have an SRO, you have one that's on standby or call, but all of you have one at your school. That should be your first call. Police should always have the first right of refusal on a crime. What did Tinker versus Des Moines say? It said that your rights don't stop at the schoolhouse door. Schools can't be can't be havens for criminality. If the law has been broken, we're supposed to report it to police. Says so in that manual I've gone over with you a dozen times, that disciplinary data reporting manual. Also in 288, it says you have to report law and violations of law to law enforcement. That's your duty. Why? But also, what if you get sued? What if the district gets sued over this harassment or this abuse that this child is, it's a bad look when they get you on the stand and say, what was your, well, I called the person Title IX. Well, why didn't you call the police? See, when you didn't call the police, whether you consciously made the decision or not, or whether you even made it subconsciously, the attorney for the student, when they sue you, is going to argue that you had already made a decision in your mind that it wasn't a violation of the law. Wait, what? Well, you didn't call the police. You call somebody, over in the district, were you trying to cover it up? Were you trying to hide it? Were you trying to minimize it? Were you trying to contain the story, the negative publicity? Did you not know that this was a violation of the law? Well, yeah. Well, did you not have a duty under 288 to call the police first? Well, yeah, but why didn't you? That means that you didn't think it was a violation of the law. You didn't take it seriously. Uh-oh. It's hard to refute that line of logic. So when a student comes in and says, this person is verbally harassing me, our first call should be to the SRO. Now, what if the SRO says, I'm gonna pass on this one? Does that mean it's over? No. Then Megan is correct. But then our next call is to the Title IX folks, and we'll start an internal investigation in the district. But we always give police the first right of refusal, because we do not want to contaminate their investigation, because they'll be quick to point that out in the court of law when they're or in the court of public opinion. Just like I told you the chief of police did in Huntersville. I told you the story of the self-contained girl who was having sex, and they said she was 16, so no harm, no foul. And her mother's pointed out that the law says that she's mentally incapacitated. She can't consent at any age, and they're like, oops. And so then they reported it to the police, and the police said, oh no. And threw them under the bus and backed the bus over them, because they said, that all the evidence is contaminated now. It's become public knowledge. There ain't any way for us to. We're quite sure a crime is committed, but we'd never be able to get a conviction in court because of the way this was handled, and it lost any sense of containment or confidentiality. And it'd be prejudicial against the young man. And so we can't, the district attorney has declined to file charges. So, this is on the school. You should have called us first. And that's exactly what the police will say. You should have called us first. And again, they won't take up every case that you have. But then you still follow through with what you have inside of your district, but you give them the opportunity first. Now, I know this notion that we want to handle this in-house. There is no in-house, or we don't want the negative publicity. Now, if somebody in the central office is mad about that, they don't need to be in the central office. You do not want a lawsuit. You don't want to lose a lawsuit against you and lose your house, or against the district because you had a duty to act and you didn't. That non-feasance. You didn't mean to hurt anybody, but you had a duty to act and you didn't. And that will come back and get you. Now, and also on a more practical point here, when you start these sexual harassment investigations, they remain sexual harassment until somebody puts their hand on somebody else, and then all of a sudden it's no longer harassment. It's either an assault, an offense, a rape, or indecent liberty. Uh-oh, those are biggies. What are we going to do now? We thought this was just an harassment deal that we could, we could do a little mediation and get through this. And now all of a sudden we found out that he's touched her inappropriately. Uh-oh. She didn't tell us that part. Well, she probably didn't know what the law was. You're the folks who's supposed to read those back 3 or 4 pages of that manual and know the difference between a sexual assault, sexual offense, and sexual harassment. State sets that. That's state law. That's not a Gaston County thing. You're supposed to read that manual. You're supposed to know that a sexual harassment turns into a sexual assault as soon as one person touches the other. Uh-oh. And you can't go to court and say, well, I thought this was just going to be sexual harassment. No, that's basically going and saying I'm incompetent. I didn't know the law, or I knew the law and didn't uphold it. All of a sudden you're just digging the hole deeper and deeper for yourself. To protect you, the district, and everybody involved, first thing we do is we get in touch with law enforcement. If they decline because it's 2 third graders, that's their business, but we're still going to follow through with it. We give them the opportunity to tell us no. Now, if they tell us no and it gets uglier down the road, that's on them. We still follow through with the district's directives, and everybody in the district is protected. If they want to sue somebody, sue the law. So you've got to know those things, that the order in which, the sequence in which you do things matters. And they're going to, and the first thing that the plaintiff's going to do is subpoena your phone records, by the way. That's the very first thing that's going to happen. So you better make sure that you can, that beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you can prove that your first call was to police, the second was to district officials. You do not want to appear any impropriety that you were in any way trying to cover this up or whatever. Now, I followed this case out of Colorado a couple of years back, and the assistant principal ended up getting a 2-year prison term out of this one. And so let me share that one with you right quick. Not reporting student sexual abuse claims appears in court. And basically her deal was, I don't believe her because this teacher, we've never had a peep out of him. I like him. He's a great teacher. The kids love him. He's done, because of who it is, as I said, I have more than this. She just couldn't believe that he would have done this. And so not only did she fail to report the student sexual assault to the police department, but suspended the girl and forced her to apologize to the teacher who had sexually abused her and hug him at the end of the meeting, because she just could not believe that this would happen. But unfortunately, he confessed to multiple students dating back to 2013. When push came to shove, when the police did get involved, they investigated, and he had to admit that he did. Now, he had denied it, of course, and all those things, but the AP was just certain that this fine this fine man that everybody at the school loved, we know who those people are, that we just can't imagine that they would do something like that. Because I tell the police doesn't mean that I don't believe in you. It means that I have to protect myself, and I have to protect the district that I work for. I have to follow through. I have a legal obligation, a duty to act. And if I don't, that's in many ways worse than what happens sometimes, unfortunately. Now, I'll tell you a personal story. I had a teacher, let's call her Kathy, that taught for me in Burke County. She had two daughters and a husband. Kathy was a nice lady. She was a beautiful family. She taught for me. The daughters, I want to say, when I got there, one was like first grade and the other one was like fourth grade. Beautiful little family, husband, you know, just ideal. He taught at the local high school. Well, reports came in, you know, and everybody, there was an accusation that he had an inappropriate relationship with a boy or boys in his after school club. He was, I'm trying to remember which, I don't know if it was, I think it was the Key Club. He was the Key Club sponsor, and everybody knows what that means, right? Everybody went to high school, and Heather could probably tell us, but you know, you have clubs and they all have to have a faculty sponsor. I think he was the Key Club sponsor, but, and Key Club goes somewhere on a trip every year or whatever, and supposedly this had happened. Well, the school just didn't believe it. They didn't, and so same kind of thing. And so the parents of the kid went to the police, and but in the end, you know, it got really ugly, and then he resigned from the school district and went to work. A private school recruited him away there in Morganton, and we'll pay him more, and you know, we know this didn't happen, and you know, these people, and he went to work over there, but unfortunately got caught with boys. And it was all true, and it had been a pattern for a number of years, and it was, you know, it was a very hurtful thing, because you know, I had his wife and his kids in school with me, and he was having inappropriate sexual relationship with boys. But part of what I learned from that, and our takeaway on that, is if people had taken the initial report seriously, it wouldn't have lasted for 10 years. But he was always given a pass. He was always given a pass until he went to the private school, and the private school got no pass because of who those people were. But in public school, he just kept getting a pass. Just kept getting a pass, and it, you know, of course, it destroyed a family, but it did more than that to the community. But it should have been investigated. It should have been reported to the police, but the school refused to do that. They didn't, and I think a lot of it is not so much respect for him, but just didn't want the negative publicity. They thought, if we just don't tell it, then we can, you know, let's stiff upper lip, we can overcome this. It ended up being a huge scandal, and that principal had to go. Even in a district where, you know, who you know is important, more important than what you know, he had to go. He'd been there for a long time. And so, and I really liked him, but he was old school. You know, we're not going to tell anything on our own people. But, you know, he was as firmly ensconced at that high school and in the community as you could get, and it still didn't matter. He had to go. There must be blood. So the notion here, folks, is that you have a duty to act. The sequence in which you perform those duties matters. Well, I called one and I called the other. I don't know. You called police first always. And then you follow through with your district reporting. You make sure it gets into Power School. And then my last rant tonight is, you know, don't have revisionist history. You get home and you know, the swelling of your lips gone down where you broke up that fight. You got the blood up out of the hall, got the kids back in the room, and then, you know, then you realize, oh my, I reported another fight. Maybe it was just disruptive behavior, or I reported it this way, and maybe it'll, you know, it was assault with injury on a teacher. And as soon as we get the 10 days, get him over to the alternative school, waiting on his hearing to whether to be excluded for a year. Let's slip back in and change that to just a simple assault, because that might cause us to get over the line on our persistently dangerous numbers. Thinking back to that handbook that I've covered with you a dozen times, you know, if you get too many of those incidents 2 years in a row, you're out as principal. So I had that exact thing happen at one of the small schools at Garinger. Now, full disclosure, that was a fool's errand to ever split those two high schools into 5 smaller schools and claim that they were different, separate schools. because we hired a bunch of assistant principals that nobody was really monitoring, and they were in competition with one another, and many of them hadn't had adequate training, and they just cheated forthright. I mean, just out and out. And so I had one of them who had a kid who brought a weapon and assaulted a faculty member with a weapon. I mean, seriously, pistol whipped a man right there in the lobby at Garinger High School. I don't mean a little bit. I mean, he was in a coma for a while, and he stayed in the hospital for weeks. And of course, they immediately arrested him. He got out. They did a 10-day suspension, had a hearing. He got and was excluded for a year. But now, when the appeal came to the board, you had to put the paperwork together, went in to pull the incident out of Power School, which is the official legal record that you have to have in a court case. Guess what? Wasn't there. It was a simple assault, no injury. Called her in. Why is it? Well, it's going to put us over our total. He's out already now. Not to worry about him coming back. No, he's not out. Not to worry about him coming back. We're going to court. You can't do things like that either. You can't put it in for what it is, and you think, weeks or months later, when you think nobody's looking, go in and change it. You can't do that. You got to report what happened at your building. And don't be that idiot that thinks if I don't suspend them, I don't have to tell it. That has nothing to do with reporting. We report incidents, not outcomes. All these are liability issues that are going to that seem far-fetched, that you're going to have to deal with on a regular basis. That you've got to understand that your go-to move, what it has to be, is I report it accurately. I report it to the police immediately. I'll let the chips fall where they may. If I want to stop some of this bad stuff from happening, maybe I need to be working on antecedent behaviors, not trying to cheat on my data or not report it. If I'll do the work up front, I won't have to cheat and do all this on the back end. That's the notion. That's what due process and discipline is all about. Doing the work on the front, supervising, knowing where your hot spots are. There's a place in every report that you do in Power School that has location. Where did it happen? You can run a report that tells you that 90% of your problems are happening on a bus or in the lunchroom or out behind the 300 building. That kind of stuff. You got to do the work. You can't just not do the work and then try to cheat on the backside. It will not go well for you. All right. So I cautioned you last week. I'm right on my time. It's 6:30. That you had to tell me two things that you learned during your summer experience, that you already knew that was confirmed, and two things that you didn't know that you learned during your experience. So we're going to go right down the line here. I'm going to start with Wood, since he's on the top left of my screen. I'm going to start with him. Two things that were confirmed that you already knew about school administration from your experience, and then two things that you didn't know that you found out this summer. You have the floor.
I'm going to start with the two things that I did not know. I think two things that I didn't know was how political it really is, and how you really have to be careful what you say. What you say really matters.
Yes.
I think that really has surprised me. I don't think that it doesn't. I'm not saying it scares me. It's just something that it's really taken me by surprise. The other aspect is how, and it's kind of connected, is how much networking matters, how much building relationships with people that you depend on. Like for instance, the bus situation matter. So I found out. Realized yesterday driving, they had put this field trip together, and they had put the field trip together going to South Carolina and did not book any activity buses. So they were relying on yellow buses to go to South Carolina.
Can't do that.
Which you can't do. And of course, and I said, wait a minute, y'all, we can't do this. So it had to be me. And so I had to make some phone calls and beg, and fortunately I had good relationships with the folks over at transportation. So we were able to work that out overnight. Two things that I did know, that bus drivers were a little bit curmudgeony at times, and I tried to write the routes I'm speaking more about this is my second summer camp. For my first one, I learned from my first one that the more detailed I can be on the bus routes, the better. And so that has helped a lot. And then the last bit is, just communication with parents and communication. But so we don't have work phone numbers. So I've put my work phone number for like the bus drivers and all the teachers. I mean, my personal phone number for all the teachers and the bus drivers and whatnot.
Mhm.
But it would be helpful to have like a actual work number. Work number that the parents could call. I'm not talking about like a cell phone. I'm talking about like a actual school phone.
Mhm.
So that's been a challenge. But those are. Did I hit my quota?
Yep. Very good.
Communicate out of that.
Mhm. A follow-up, as I told you, I think earlier this summer, if you're new to the district, or if it's like a district camp or summer school that's different than the regular year, I know that we have Google Earth and Google Maps and all that. You need to get out and ride the routes.
Yeah.
You need to do that so that you can speak somewhat intelligently to bus drivers when they have issues or complaints. You need to do that, and you need to take notes. What in the business we call field notes. You need to do that when you do that. Excellent communication. Again, what you say and how you say it, the relationships you build, goes back to FERPA. Can't be talking about. You shouldn't be talking about children to anybody, teachers, parents, or anybody. That's and what you say, and you shouldn't be talking about other people that are employed. Those kinds of things. I'll give you an example for me, and again, this is not about me, but I have two classes this summer, Tuesday and Wednesday night, exactly the same classes. One of the things that I even caution myself is don't do a comparison. It's not fair to compare people within the class. It's not compare the two classes. And one of the things that I hear folks in the school business do all the time is comparing younger siblings to older siblings. I hear people comparing this teacher to that teacher, this class to that class, or these. No. Now, if you want to be, that's one of the things that you got to understand. When you move into the administrative role, you can't do those kinds of things. That's very good, Wood. Thank you. Alex?
I would say one thing is the law is the law. There's no gray area. The law doesn't care about your personal feelings. The law is the law. I think that's mainly one thing that's been hit home to me this semester. Second, I think going along with what Wood said, I think communication and being prepared is another thing on the front end as far as dealing with certain issues of liability, certain issues of inclusion, all of the different activities that we had to do on the discussion board. I think you can alleviate a lot of issues for yourself if you're prepared. Both with stuff you have to do on the front end, just like you were talking about earlier. So those are two things. So yeah, I would say that.
Excellent. Now I'll use myself. Thank you, Alex. That's very insightful. I'll use myself as the example. My father told me a long time ago, son, it's not likely that you're going to be the smartest fella in the room, any room you're in, but you can always be the hardest working. You may outsmart me. That's no great shakes, but you're going to have to stay up late if you're going to outwork me. And so that's the notion, and that's what makes a good school administrator: the planning and preparation, writing of those routes, knowing what you're doing, being willing to put the work in, antecedent behaviors, take care of the little things, be diligent in your job. That hard work will carry you through better and more than anything that I know of. Long time ago, I coached baseball with a fellow who was, he was in his last year, he was retiring, and he'd been a minor league player in the Detroit organization, and somebody from his hometown had come up and visited him, and they were riding by, I think it was the Miller Brewery there in Detroit. It might have been the Stroh's Brewery in Detroit, but anyway, one of the local fellows from back home said, see there, Pete, I told you you couldn't drink them dry. They were driving by in the middle of the night and the place was just working like bees. And he said, yeah, I might not could drink them dry, but I've got them working the third shift. And so the notion here is you may have to work the third shift. You know, whatever it takes to get the job done. Second shift, third shift, that you will be much more successful if you do the work. To Alex's point is planning and preparation. Putting the work in will carry you through. Thank you for that, Alex. Heather.
Hi. So two things that I did know from the summer, specifically from the summer camp that I did, is the importance of knowing the staff members in your building that you work with and their strengths and weaknesses. And not only that, knowing their names, because they tend to work harder for you when you show them the respect of knowing them. As one thing I did know, and I used that this summer because I'm one of those people that I'm terrible with remembering names. So I made sure I paid attention to the teachers' names and before we started the process of summer camp. Another thing that I did know is, and Wood had said this, one of the things that he didn't know the importance of, but I know as an EC teacher, the importance of knowing how you say things and what you say to people. That is something that's, sorry, my dog's making noise with his tail. The importance of knowing how to say things to people to not offend them, but also be legal and ethical with them. Two things that I didn't know that I did learn this summer is also the importance of the different type of staff and the different aspects that they play in the role of the school day. You know, as just us being teachers, we have like a very limited view of what we're supposed to be doing, and seeing other teachers and other staff members doing what they're supposed to do kind of like opens your eyes to a whole school experience. Another thing I didn't know was the way that they activate the emergency system when we did our fire drills and tornado drills and all that. There was like a certain number that you had to call and ask for permission and certain time frame on drills. So that was very interesting. I thought it was just you call like the police and say, hey, I'm doing it, but no, that's not the case. So that was very eye-opening for me as well.
Yeah, you can't just be doing drills, pulling the alarm whenever you want to. You have to make sure that you have those planned and prepared. Again, that goes back to that planning and preparation, knowing what the rules are in your district and knowing what the policy are on those kinds of things. Did any of you attend our interviewing town hall Monday night? A couple of you did. To Heather's point, I'll share my screen. Number one thing, when you get your first administrative job at the first faculty meeting, what is it? Heather just told us. Know everybody's name and what they do. That's Dale's top 10. That's number one. That's number one. And if you can't remember them, move around the room and have them introduce themselves. Proximity and eye contact are important. If you want people to work for you, and if you want them to respect you, if you want to inspire and motivate them, you got to at least know their name. You got to put in at least that much effort. Now, I told you the story Wednesday and Monday night. It's absolutely the truth. I have eidetic memory. not photographic. I have eidetic memory. And so it's stood me well in my career. But one of the things that I could do is take an annual, read through it a couple of times and be able to put everybody's name with their face and go around the room and introduce everybody in the room. I did it with over 200 faculty members at the high school. I had people come from far and wide just to watch it like a carnival trick. Now again, that's not something, I'm not being boastful because that's just a gift. I was just given that. Not something that I earned or had to work for. But if you don't have it, you better get it, or you got to find a way to substitute it. But Heather's exactly right. I love that, Heather, obviously, since it's my number one. You got to know the people that you need to know who they are and what they do for you. You can't lead them if you don't even know who they are or what they do. You know, that's that's key. I think that's exactly right, Heather. You're exactly right. And language does matter. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Thank you, Heather. Megan?
So the two things that I did not know, and this is very specific, I guess, because I've been in middle school for a while, is that like kindergarten and first grade students have to have an adult present when they get dropped off at their bus stop, or they cannot get off. We actually had an issue with that this summer, and it kind of like brought to our attention that, like, you know, that's important that these little children aren't just wandering around their neighborhood without an adult. Also, like I knew this, but it kind of brought it to the forefront of like knowing your resources and being available / like staying on your toes. We dealt with a lot of ELL students and newcomers. Sorry. And stop, Jude, honey, stop. And we had to like call translators, and we had to like know who to call. And you know, when there was a medical emergency on the bus, like we got to see in action like all that the site coordinator had to do, and you had to stay later, and you just kind of have to be prepared for those things. And then the two things that I did know, but were kind of hard when you're put in that position, is like doing the right thing is not always the easiest thing. So having to call parents about behavior and sensitive issues, and you know, you're doing that a lot of the time. And then working with adults is a lot harder than working with students, but you have to keep your composure because that's important, because that's your faculty that you have to work with every day. So kind of sometimes biting your tongue and, you know, turning the other cheek is important when being in that position.
Yeah. You know, it's hard, one of the, thank you, Megan. One of the hardest things is that it's not personal, it's just business. Because we tend to internalize and say people say bad things to us, or are rude or angry or whatever, but you have to let it roll off of you, and that's very hard. But you're exactly right. It's, you know, as I was talking about Wednesday night, if they do that strength finder kind of when you do the cattle call interview, you know, the first level, the weeding out interview, and they ask you, would you rather, if it paid the same, would you rather work with kids or adults? If you say kids, they'll let you work, because you got to understand, you're going to be working with adults as a school administrator. That's a different job. You got to catch another gear. It's a lot harder. It's a lot less rewarding as well at times. But you have to keep in mind that you're trying to impact more lives and more students by doing that than just outside your classroom. But you're exactly right, Megan. Working with adults is not easy. It's kind of ugly. Now, you brought up one thing that I probably have been neglectful on, and I thought I had mentioned it, but I probably didn't. So, I'll take the heat on this. Liability for buses is portal to portal in North Carolina. Does anybody know what portal to portal means? All right. So, from the time a kid walks out their front door, that's their portal. When they walk out their front door on the way to the bus stop, while at the bus stop, while on the bus to school, while at school, while on the bus back home, and then from at the bus stop, and then from bus stop back to their front door, you are legally responsible. You are for that child during that time, portal to portal. Now, you'll have people who will argue, well, that happened at the bus stop, we don't have to be involved with it. Yeah, you do. If it's a designated bus stop for your school, then you're responsible for it. Well, they were walking to the bus stop, door to door, portal to portal. You have a duty and responsibility to act. Remember when we talked about that in terms of people will say, well, with cyberbullying, well, I don't know if it didn't happen here at school, so I don't have to deal with it. No, that's not true. Yeah, or it happened on the way to the bus stop, not at the bus stop. That's not true. Door to door, portal to portal. You're responsible. And Megan's exactly right. You can't let primary kids off, but there's nobody at the stop. Can't do that. And that creates an issue with people who are absentee. What are you going to do with those kids? Well, we're going to bring them back to school, and we're going to sit and wait with them until somebody comes and gets them. They're not going to be happy. You could have let them off. It wasn't, but this, that, no, we can't. There is no easy button in school administration. What commercial is it has that easy button that you hit on your desk? Was that Staples or one of those places? Yeah. No easy button in this business. And boy, they'll be mad as fire. You may come get this kid. You could have just let him right off. Well, that's law's always the law. Like Alex said, it's always the law. You can't ever walk away from it. You can't ever ignore it. It doesn't change. And you could let that kid off 100 times, and 100 times, and 99 of them be okay. But that one time somebody comes along and scoops that kid up and leaves with him, boy, that wouldn't go well for you, either legally or financially or emotionally. You'd think about that every day the rest of your life. Would not be good. Very good. Thank you, Megan. Emily?
Okay, so two of the things that I did not know was how much really goes into making a master schedule, how many different people, how many different parts come into that. And then the process behind getting a field trip approved. I guess we've been out of the loop of doing field trips for the past 2 years, so I guess I haven't really had any hands-on experience with that in a while, but just knowing the process behind not just having your principal approve it, that was new. And then two things that were confirmed is, like Wood said, how political and how important it is that you know the law when you're an administrator, and how to take our own feelings out of a situation is even more important, I feel like, as an administrator, making sure that you take your personal feelings out of whatever situation you're working with.
Yeah, it is. But just like Wood was talking about with the field trip, yellow buses can't cross the state line. A lot of districts, they can't cross the county line either. Now, I do know a couple of districts that have a waiver on that. I don't think Gaston does. I don't think you can use a yellow bus outside the confines of Gaston County. I don't think you can go to Charlotte anymore.
You can get approval within 50 miles.
Yeah. And so that's what I mean. You have to get a waiver of the no county rule, and that's only good up to 50 miles. You can't drive one to Manio. Let's just put it that way. That can't be done. And so those are local rules that you have to know, and those things. So communication, law matters, how difficult it is, how political it is. It's not for the faint of heart. That's exactly right, Emily. So again, thank you. Hope Pierce as well. Savannah?
Okay, so my two things I knew, very general. Transportation is hard. That's one thing I knew. Everybody just said it's going to be terrible, and it was every bit of terrible. So I knew that. The other thing that I knew is communication is essential, because as a teacher, we know that. However, one thing that I've realized in all of this is that my problems inside my classroom are very small compared to when you're dealing with the problems of everyone, and how if I decide to not answer a parent because it's after 6 p.m., everything's going to be fine, the world's still going to turn. But when you're in the position we were in summer school, if we don't answer that message at 6 o'clock, the world might not turn and you might be liable for something. So that was something, two really general things that I knew were important, but you learn the extra layer to it, I think. So two things I didn't know. One thing I honestly truly did not know that my principal told us is that in the event of the emergency on the bus, like where Megan and Alex and I were, our principal said she had to actually go out to the bus.
Oh, Savannah has frozen.
The storms are probably affecting her.
Yeah.
Knocked her Wi-Fi out one time before.
Okay. We'll give her a second to see if she gets back. Okay, so. All right.
Okay,
Are
sorry.
you back? So your principal told you what?
So she told us that we had like the emergency Megan was mentioning earlier, where we had a bus driver have a medical emergency on the bus and he had to pull over. Our principal was explaining to us that you cannot leave the bus on the side of the road, even though there's like no kids on it. And like, I didn't know that. So she was walking us through like what she had to do, like going to that location, sitting with the bus, like, you know, making sure the driver gets taken to the hospital, making sure the kids get. So that was something that I learned, like a technical rule that I didn't know, and just basically what you would do in that situation. So that's something that I learned there. She also mentioned that one of the substitute drivers that came to get, you know, some of the kids to take them home, one of the kids had to go to the bathroom. And she had to look on her map, like she's not even with the bus. She had to look on the map and see what the closest school was. Because then we started asking questions like Megan and I and Alex, we were like, okay, but what if there's no school? Can they not go in the gas station? And she was just telling us, you know, no, you can't do that. And so like we learned a lot just from that situation. So that was one of the things that I learned, just the technicalities when you do have that emergency and kids are not confined to the bus because you have to, you know, get them where they need to go. The other thing was we had the opportunity, our principal was actually, she's actually transitioning to principal of the school. So she was an AP and she's, you know, going to become a principal. So she actually was off campus a few days where me and Alex and Megan were the grown-ups. And, you know, that was, yeah, we got to learn a lot of things. And one of those days we had to run all the safety drills. And so me and Alex got a surprise scenario by someone that was there. He's like, all right, what are you going to do if? And so I learned that you have to tell the police where they should set up. Like people may be asking you that, and that's some like in the event of a shooter or emergency. And I had no idea about that because my first impression was like that the police would know and they would kind of go where they felt like they needed to go. But he kind of gave us a long safety thing about how, you know, we'll be asked, where can they set up? I know that we will be asked about black box and things like that, but actually where they set up was something like we truly didn't know. So we learned that. I learned that as well.
Okay, that would be a part of your crisis plan, is where your command center, that's what it's called, where your command center would be. That's got to be a part of that crisis plan that's in that black box. So the standard is the police would come to the main office and they would know to find your black box under the front counter. And in that black box would be your crisis plan, which would have all the shutoffs for power, water, and gas, but it also would have your evacuations where the the police don't know any of this stuff. And they would have where they were to set up their command center, where they had comms and communications. All that's got to be in that crisis plan. That's exactly right. You can't assume when the police come in that they know anything. More than likely, your resource officer's not going to be there. Or if you know if hopefully they're going to be there, but what if they aren't? You can't depend on somebody to tell the police, all right, this is, you know, we're going to go to the ball field, or we're going to go to the church, or you know, the gas is here, the water's there, or we need to set up over here. all that's got to be written down, because, you know, one of the things, what was it I was watching recently? And it's generally referred to statistically as the perfect storm, when all these things that are highly improbable, if they all happen in a certain sequence, you have like the meltdown at 3 Mile Island, the nuclear facility in Pennsylvania. You know, that's kind of what happens is they had the perfect storm at Butler High School when the kid got shot and killed. They were transitioning to a new administrator. The resource officer was new. We had a new administration in the district. Nobody had bothered to go in and update their crisis plan. They didn't have, it all just happened. A perfect storm of bad things happened. And it just turned into a complete disaster. Parents not knowing where their kids were, kids out and about, you know, it was a political nightmare. And that superintendent did not survive it. And nor did some other folks in the district. I mean, that was just the most visible one, but that he wasn't the only one that had to go home. But again, you're exactly right. That black box has got to have everything in it. And that's one of those things. That's where your command center is going to be. That's excellent. I hope that one of the things that, as before we get to Daphne, who'll be next, that you'll understand one of the things that we're doing in practice tonight is we're reflecting on our practice. That may be the most important thing that we learn as administrators is we got to work hard and plan and prepare, but we got to reflect as well. What works and what doesn't work. What did we know? How are we going to accommodate this new information? What we're going to do to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes twice? Those kinds of things is reflecting on practice. and that's why I'm so pleased that y'all got these opportunities for summer, for these summer programs, because it gives you some practice to reflect on. Daphne, what'd you learn this summer?
Well, two things that I already knew, but just were really reverberated throughout summer school. People want to be heard, and that's from students to staff to parents. And you can avoid a lot of headache by just taking those few minutes to just listen to people. If they just want to vent, and as an administrator, you don't feel like you have a lot of time for that, but it keeps a lot of things from de-escalating. And so even from kids wanting to tell you in the cafeteria, I finished my story, to teachers who have a complaint, to parents who are, going ballistic because the bus came 10 minutes early. You save yourself a lot of trouble if you just sit there and hear them out. And they understand at the end of the day when you can't solve the problem, but you need to be able to let them be heard, because the flip side of that is when they don't feel heard, they keep clanging louder and they go up the ladder and complain a whole lot more until they feel like they've been heard. So you save yourself a lot of trouble on the front end just listening. Another thing that I already knew, but then was kind of, again, reiterated through a summer camp, is that you need to know how to hear the complaints and be able to just go with it. It is what it is. You can't fix it, but you need to know how to apologize, even if you had nothing to do with whatever it was that happened. Because if sometimes parents want to be heard, and sometimes they just want an apology. And if you can just say, I'm really sorry that happened, I understand, and identify with them, I would be upset if something similar happened to me. That's all they want. So first to be heard, and then sometimes that almighty apology, even if when you hang up the phone, you curse sideways because it's just ridiculous, but they need to hear that. Two things I didn't know. I didn't understand the scope of investigation when you do have an incident at school. We had a child whose parents sent us pictures back to school whenever they got home, and the child has second-degree burns on their hands, on both hands. And the parent complained that it happened outside on the playground, and that they had taken the child to the doctor, and the doctor said it was too hot for us to be outside anyway. Well, everybody was out there. Nobody else got burns on their hands, yada, yada, yada. We couldn't argue that. We just had to hear the parents' complaints, get the pictures, report it to the proper people. And I mean, even like the next day, Gaston County Schools sent somebody out with a thermometer to check the temperature of the playground equipment at the hottest part of the day. I mean, they were that thorough in investigating what happened. And we still don't know how that child got second-degree burns on both her hands. And even the children who were playing with her, we kept saying, holy crap, if that happened to her, we're gonna have a class full of kids coming in tomorrow with burnt hands. And nobody else had that issue. So watching them work through that process and like having the lawyers call and say, okay, you're done talking to parents, you're done talking to, no more questions. If they have anything else, refer them here. So that was interesting. The other thing that I found, again, had to do with investigative work. I had no idea how much the Gaston County Police monitor what goes on in social media regarding schools. So we get to school one Monday morning and the SRO pulls us together and says, this is on Facebook, this is gonna be a problem. We're trying to work on it, we'll let you know what happens. And they ended up going to the person's house in Charlotte to talk to them about something they posted about our school site, warning people not to send their kids to school for that week. And so to watch all of that play out was just, it was interesting. I had no idea how closely, like we have SROs, but that the police department were the first ones to pick up on this supposed threat. They saw it on social media and they were the ones that came and contacted the administrator and pulled the site coordinator, myself, and the AP with the administrator to tell us, have you seen this on social media? And this is what we're going to do to address it. So, and we did have that last week, the number declined immensely because of that situation, even though the police were involved and had it removed from social media and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That, thank you for that, Daphne. You got to have a relationship with your police. That's why I said you go to them first. You give them the first right of refusal. If you start hiding things from your own SRO, boy, they'll find a way to get you. And they're looking out for you. They're monitoring Facebook. That slideshow that I had on antecedent behaviors, there was one, the kids all in the gang had the guns up. That came from the police. The police sent us that, and we were able to identify who those were. I remember that like it was yesterday. That was a kid that was involved in the shooting at East Met that was in that picture holding that gun. But the police did that. So you got to have a relationship with them. It's not a burden to deal with them. It's not an aggravation to have to make sure you find them before and make sure they're the first one that to know. If you've got that kind of communication and relationship with them, things will work out a whole lot better for you when things get tough like that. That's exactly right. Now, to the first thing that Daphne talked about is you got to take those whippings, you got to take those calls, you got to be available for all those things. Now, part of that is self-reflection as well, is you got to know what your hide is, HIDE. Who knows what a hide is? I'm not talking about our skin. What is a hide? Anybody know? All right. A hide is a place where you go not to be found, where you can hide from things that you don't want to deal with. And so I can tell what kind of person, whether you're an operational person or a curriculum person based on your hide. Now, I'm an operational person. I'll tell you where I hid. I hid at the ball field, lunchroom, places like that, so that I didn't have to deal with all the crazies that came into the office. Curriculum people hide in classrooms. Oh, I've got to do all these observations, or I need to be in this room. I need to be doing this. But you're doing it, you got to understand and reflect on your own behavior and your own actions, that you're doing that to avoid dealing with what you're supposed to be dealing with, as Daphne said, hearing those people's complaints, being involved with the public, being the point person. Now, you just can't get away from that. You've got to monitor your own behavior. Do you really need to be in the lunchroom for all 3 shifts every day? Do you really need to be down at the gym every afternoon to try to avoid all the backlash that's going to come when parents come in to pick up kids? I mean, do you really need to be in every room every day, all day? Yeah, you got to be in there some. We'll talk about that in instructional leadership next semester. But folks, you got to reflect and monitor your own behavior. You've got to be available. As Daphne said, sometimes those people just need to be heard. Maybe you can't fix their problem, but your job is to hear their problem, even if you can't fix it. So you've got to be honest with yourself about what your hide is. Where do I hide to avoid the things I don't want to do? So you got to make sure that you know that and that you act accordingly. Marcia?
Okay, well, the 2 things that I already knew, and everybody's kind of said this, but the number 1 thing was building the relationships. I kind of tried to study everybody. I had to make name tags for the doors and kind of tried to see what school they were at, what grade they taught, where, and try to learn a little something personal about them. Even looked on Facebook a little bit to see who I was working with, just to kind of get to know them and kind of learn their face. And then communicating, not just by one avenue, but with lots of different routes. Because, these people came from all different schools, all different grade levels. They weren't used to the systems that we had at summer school. So just coming up with ways to communicate daily, and running PLCs. And I feel like I was good at that because we've done so much of that in this program. So like developing norms, because I don't know about everybody else, but that was my daily job, was to run PLCs too. So that was something I felt confident in, those 2 things. The 2 things I did not know about were, 1, the biggest thing, that buses are the devil. And I had no clue how hard it was to get bus routes and get everybody where they needed to be in the afternoon, and how many hours I would spend on the phone with parents, and how long I would stay at school just making sure those buses had gotten there. So I learned really quick that, coming up with a system to make sure I knew that kid was on that bus. I learned that early on. And by day 2, I had name tags for everybody, checklists, all kinds of things, so that when I was answering those phones, I could assure those parents that their student was on that bus. It might be running behind. And I also learned that if you have a really good lead bus driver and you become really good friends with them, and maybe bring them donuts occasionally, that they will do a lot of work for you and they will help you out in any way. And the second thing I learned that I didn't know a lot about was the testing planning for like the Read to Achieve test. All the accommodations and everything, and the actual plan itself and what you did with that plan. That was new to me because I teach the lower grades where I don't have to administer the test. So just being in charge of testing and having to figure out, from different schools where all these kids, what are their 504s, what are their accommodations, what tests are they taking? So that was a big project as well. So those are my 4 things.
Excellent. Excellent. Now, you all know that more than likely your first AP job, you're going to be in charge of buses.
Any of that?
Pardon? I think we've lost. Marcia, are you still there?
I'm here, but my internet is really long.
Yeah. But to follow up on what Marcia said is you folks do realize that you're probably going to be in charge of buses, or you're at least going to be handling them. And so this is good training. And I think Marcia made a great point there that, you know, I can tell you right now, I used to stop every Friday at Davis's Donut House and buy donuts for the drivers. I buy them for teachers too and put them in the lounge, but I made sure the drivers got theirs as well. And every time we had, you know, when I was high school principal and we had, you know, Price's Chicken Coop, made sure the drivers had chicken, make sure that they got shirts. You know, if you can involve them, again, you can whip a lot of these problems. If you can get some decent people, even if you aren't in charge of them, you need to make sure that you build these relationships. Again, relationships are key. All right. Okay. Everybody's moved around here. Paris?
Okay, so two things that I did already know are kind of some things that we have already touched on about communication being the key, especially with the teachers. And then the other one was dealing with the adults in the building. You know that dealing with adults is difficult sometimes, but it always seemed to be the same adults with problems and things that would occur on a daily basis. So I think I did know that, but just being a part of that every single day was very, very interesting. Just dealing with the adult part. Two things that I didn't know. I am an elementary teacher, so I was placed in a middle school. And so cell phones are a big, huge problem with middle schoolers. They love their cell phone. And they would get out on the playground and they would call their mamas and tell their mamas that they were being bullied on the playground and that we needed to come and do something about it. And in the office, we had no idea what they were talking about. So just watching the cell phones, they're sneaky little things with their cell phones, and they like to chat everywhere and call everybody. And so that was very eye-opening to me about what a big deal the cell phones are in middle school. And the other thing that I didn't know about is we had a student come in and tell us that she did want to die one day, very upset. And so just having to walk through that whole process of reporting that threat and getting that self-assessment, and it being the summertime and not having all the available people right on our campus, having to find those people and bring those in, that was something that was a very interesting process to learn and to go through.
Yeah. Yeah, that reporting piece, you can't ignore it, you know. You know, it's a lot more lengthy but you've got to follow through and do that. And it doesn't matter that it's summer or it's a special program. That doesn't absolve you of the responsibility, you know, or the liability if you don't, failure to act. Excellent, Paris. All right, Charlene.
I'm here. I'm going to start with what I do know. So the principal must be ethical regarding their conduct and make judgments regardless of their personal feelings and preferences. So even though you may be friendly with a staff member, if something comes up and they're at fault or accused of something, then you must act regardless of your personal feelings towards that person. They must also follow the rule of law and provide protection for students and employees to avoid any potential liability. Another thing that I did know, having well-trained and alert staff members help to mitigate risk for potential liability. So you want to start out with training staff members, making them aware of do's and don'ts so that you limit that potential from the onset. I also realized more that leadership is very lonesome and is most time uncompromising. So regardless of how you feel, you must do the right thing. What I did not know, I knew in terms of teaching and supervising kids, there are some things that you are liable for if you don't take actions. But in terms of the official terminologies where we looked at the different types of negligence, I wasn't aware of those. And that if you didn't act, then you might be liable. Or if you act and did the wrong thing, you're still liable. And if you do the wrong thing with bad intent, you're still liable. So I learned those terminologies and using those going forward. And also the principal's responsibility in terms of budgeting for the school and handling monies and making decisions that are in the best interest of the school population. Didn't know how integral that was in terms of a role for a principal, and also making that documentation accessible to parents of children and also community members who might need to have access to that. So those are the two things that I did not know, but now I'm aware. So thank you.
Very good. A great point that Charlene just made is don't hide your light under a basket. It's important that if you know it, your staff knows it. You know, these things that you've learned, take advantage of your professional development days and make sure teachers know these same things as well. And they can really do a lot of lookout for you and heads up, and can do a lot of this work and help you out in the administration of your school. You just because you know it doesn't mean they know it. So you got to be sure that you share with them. Utilize your faculty meetings to make sure that you impart information on a regular basis with these folks. Keep everybody in the loop. Everything you know, they should know. And you get more buy-in from them as well, but you also get a lot of help and a lot of assistance in administering a school from your faculty. If you're transparent with them and can communicate with them well, I think that's a good thing. Yeah, it's not just important that you know all these things, especially the law. It's important your teachers know them as well. Very good. Monica?
I'm going to go with the two things that I didn't know first. The amount of deadlines. I know, that people need what they need and they need it now. And whether we have to stay over late or whatever we had to do, we had to make sure that those deadlines were met because it was very important. Another thing was, and I even put this in my reflection for this semester, is the magnitude of service that you have as a leader. When you're a leader, you serve more than you lead. You continue to serve. You serve students, you serve families, you serve the staff, the custodians, whoever needs what. You're constantly serving others. And you do have, I heard some of my peers say that you do have some groups like that. It's hard working with adults because, sometimes it seems like, what you do, it's constantly criticized, or it's not enough, or it's too much. And you just have to learn how to be professional and just do the best you can. And at the end of the day, be okay with that. So the two things that I didn't know was that buses are difficult, but through this experience, I've concluded that they are a beast. That first week, we had a lot of hiccups with buses, and I just learned that, with buses, there is a lot of liability. You have to make sure that kids get dropped off at the right place, that you have those forms signed for them to ride the bus, that you have everything that you need to have when students are on that bus. And then for the second thing that I didn't know is that school productivity flows from the top down.
Excellent. One of the things that I used to have to do that I didn't really care to have to do, but I had to do it anyway, is when I supervised principals from the central office. From time to time, I would have to go out to a school and have what we used to call a come to Jesus meeting. We now call those critical conversations with principals and assistant principals about what were you doing that we weren't paying you for that prevented you from doing what we were paying you for. Why is this report late? Why is this information? Why did you not meet this deadline? Why did you go over your time limit on reavals? Fill in the blank. The school business turns on data. That's an army, moves on its stomach. The school business turns on data. And you can't be late. If you're consistently late, we go biblical. We need a new ox. What was it in the Bible? If it's okay to miss church on Sunday if your ox is in the ditch, if it's an emergency. But if your ox is in the ditch every Sunday, that's not an emergency. We just need a new ox. And so you've got to hit those deadlines. You've got to make sure that whatever you owe the people at the central office, whatever is supposed to be turned in, that you hit those deadlines. You don't want somebody coming out, your area superintendent or assistant superintendent or the superintendent to come out and say, what were you doing that you didn't get this done? Maybe we need to reevaluate your assignment. And so that's exactly right. You've got to be planned and prepared. You've got to hit your deadlines. That's a biggie in school administration. Otherwise, the folks in the central office, they won't have any grace for you. And to your other point, Gardner-Webb's motto, we remind all of our doctoral students of this when they have completed or passed their final defense. And I'll remind you of this. Gardner-Webb's motto is Pro Deo et Humanitate, which is Latin for service for God and humanity. That when you become a leader, it's your job to serve. It's not being serviced and everybody work for you, it's you work for them. That you must be a servant leader. That is the only way that you'll be successful when you're leading an organization, especially an educational one, is that your life is now of service. Excellent job. All right, Angie.
Okay, mine are kind of like a double-edged sword, I guess. It's sort of things I knew and didn't know mixed together. So I did know that being the bad guy sucks. So just dealing with like all the things that other people have kind of talked about, like having to be the one to say, well, but we have to do it this way, even though like I do understand from their point of view that we might not like that. It might not be what we want to do, but it is what we have to do. So, and then that basically just the making decisions and how it wears you out. Like we all know that from being in the classroom, but like somebody else said, whenever you're the one that has to like deal with everybody's issues all the time, and people are always coming to you and asking you this and asking you that, and it's something that you really just didn't even consider because it seems so minor, like it just wasn't one of the big things that you were like, I'm ready for the day. But then somebody comes and asks you this and you're like, I don't know, like, let me think on that for a second, or let me get right back to you, or, whatever. So it just wears you out to be the one that makes all the decisions. And then kind of like Emily mentioned it too, just the master schedule and how hard that is to kind of put together, especially in elementary school. Like I know in Gaston County, the amount of specials teachers that we have, like the itinerant teachers are different at every school. Some people have all their itinerants for 5 days. Some people have them for 2 days or 2.5 days. And so just all the things that go into that.
Very good. All right. For our history teachers in the crowd, Harry Truman had a plaque on his desk. Number one, who was Harry Truman? Number two, what was the plaque that Harry had on his desk?
The buck stops here.
That is correct. To Angie's point, it's always you. You're the one who does the dirty jobs that nobody else wants to do. Being a servant leader and being in charge doesn't mean that you get to avoid the ugly jobs, the bad jobs, or the dirty job. It means that you're first in line. The buck stops with you. Others will take your lead. If you shirk your responsibility and dodge the angry parent or don't follow through on the hard stuff, then your faculty will do exactly the same thing. The only way that you can get them to be responsible and caring and proactive and do the things that they need to do is for you to do the same. You must set the example. The buck stops here. Very good. Laura?
Hello.
Hi.
So my experience is a little different from everyone because I had two different schools. So with two distinct demographics. So one of the things that I learned is it doesn't matter the demographic of a school. If it's well run with those great expectations and procedures, everything will, for the most part, fall in order. So that was one of my biggest takeaways. And something that was reinforced for me was not to make an assumption about how you think a parent will respond in a situation, to go in kind of with a clear mind, because we had a situation where a child got kicked off the bus due to their behavior, and everyone kind of thought the parent was going to respond a certain way, and it was up to me to call the parent when she was actually very understanding of why her child was kicked off the bus and wasn't nearly as upset as we thought the parent would be. Some of the things I learned, two of the things I learned, one of my principals really took me through the processes that assistant principals may have to do on a day-to-day basis. So they took me through the safety manual. They took me through how to order supplies, how to put in work orders for the custodian, how to do the payroll, the safety routines, all of that kind of stuff. So I got to learn or see a lot of the processes. And at my other school, one of the things I did not know is some of the services that are offered to children may not be available during summer camp. So we had a student who typically has a one-on-one, but because it was summer and that paraprofessional was not available, he did not have his one-on-one, and that was explained to the parent, and the parent was able to make the decision on whether or not they wanted that child to attend. So I didn't know that. I thought that maybe, they would have figured out some type of accommodation for that. Now, we did step in for that child when they needed it, but they seemed to do well even without the one-on-one because everything was so highly engaging.
Excellent. Please remember, one of the reasons why I had you sit in on an IEP meeting, please remember that either the assistant principal, one of the assistant principals, or the principal have to be in those meetings, those IEP meetings, as the LEA representative. That is your official role in that meeting. That LEA representative has to be versed in what services are available. That's the biggest reason why you are there, is to know what services are and are not available at any given time or any particular situation. And so when you get to be an assistant principal, if you're going to have to go into an accommodation meeting or an IEP meeting, you better know, and your role as LEA representative, you better know what is offered and what isn't. Homebound, one-on-one, those kinds of things. And that's why we had you do an audit of your school. What services do we offer here? What is available? What do we have? That's something that you have to know when you are serving in that role as LEA representative. Did everybody get an opportunity to go tonight? Prayers for Wanda. I think Wanda had an emergency and she's not with us, but did everybody else get to go tonight? I think I got everybody. Well, I hope that your summer experience has been a good one at your sites where you got an opportunity to, you might not have had any bullets in your gun, but at least you got to carry a gun. That's probably a poor metaphor in the school business nowadays, but goes back to the old Andy Griffith days with Barney. As I've told you, you learn a lot of good lessons from watching Andy Griffith. And in the end, back to what I've told you before, and I mentioned even again, when people are looking to hire folks for their first administrative job, we've got to project that when we put you in charge, just like who was talking about when their principal left and they got to be in charge, got to be the grown-ups. I think Savannah said they got to be the grown-ups for a day or two, that you're not going to do something crazy when they're gone. In the first season, Andy Griffith, when Andy went to Raleigh, Barney, he went crazy. He gave Gomer a gun and deputized Otis to town drum. That's what we worry about. Those are the things that we've got to believe, that you're going to be the kind of person that we can leave in charge, that we can project to do the right thing, that knows the right thing to do and will follow through and do that. And so in conclusion this evening, part of what I hope that you learned from your summer experience and from our course this summer is a lot of what you've got to know to be an administrator is to know what's important and then how to act upon that, and not waste your time hiding or dodging or not being a servant, filling your days with insignificant things that make you look like you're busy but don't really contribute to the overall success of the organization. And so my final story for the summer is not so much anymore, a little bit, but at one time in my life, I was a pretty avid motorcycle rider. And when I first moved to the Lake Norman area, one of the things that I would do is I would ride back and forth to town, not so much to schools, but back and forth to the Ed Center. I'd ride the back way down Beatty's Ford Road. Back in those days, before the school was built on every corner on Beatty's Ford. I think 6 schools have been built on Beatty's Ford since I've been there for 28 years or whatever. There was a good bit of rural farmland up and down Beatty's Ford Road. And so I was driving home one day. This is a true story as far as you know. I was riding home one day on my motorcycle, and I passed there was a dairy farm on the left, but out near the road, there was a crabapple tree. For those of you know, the little wild crab apples that grow on those trees, back in the day, they used to make crabapple jelly. And there was the old man, Mr. Cashin, he was standing there. He'd long since retired, and they'd got rid of the dairy cows, but he was standing out there next to the road, white fence, and he was, and I saw him, and I thought, did I see what I just saw? And so I pulled my motorcycle over, and I stopped there at what was Gilead Fire Department. Now it's North Meck Volunteer Fire Department. I pulled over in their parking lot, and I stopped, got off my motorcycle, and I walked back down the side of the road. And I walked up, and sure enough, Mr. Cashin, I don't know, he's probably about 80 years old. He's standing there in a pair of Gallus overalls, and he was holding a little pig in his hand. And he was holding the little pig up so that the pig could eat the crab apples off the tree. And I said, hello, Mr. Cashin. I said, howdy. I said, how you doing today? He said, I'm doing fine. I said, I'm going to be impertinent, Mr. Cashin. I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm holding this pig up so he can eat these crab apples off this tree. And you know me, I couldn't resist. And so I said, wouldn't it save a lot of time just to pull the crab apples off the tree and throw them on the ground so the pig could eat the crab apples off the ground? And he looked at me and he said, well, you darn fool, what's time to a pig? Not understanding that I was talking about his time, not the pig's time. Unfortunately, in the school business, a lot of leaders stand around a lot of time holding the pig, doing things that don't really matter in order to avoid doing the things that do matter. I want your time in school to be impactful. You need to be champions for kids. You need to be heroes for the for the faculty. You need to be the hardest working person in the building. You need to know what's important and when to do it and when to not do things. You need to be the go-to person. The buck stops here. Insert overused metaphor here. It is you. You are the focal point. As Laura said, how you go and how is how the building will go. If it's well run, planned, prepared, organized, it won't matter about your clientele. Things will go well. If you aren't, it won't. If you spend your time doing insignificant things, avoiding the real thing, the real work of the organization, if you stand around holding the pig, something that appears that's necessary or takes up your time or you think is of value, but it's not of any value, then your school will not work well. You will not be a quality administrator. You must face your problems head on and deal with the hard things. That's what they pay you for, to deal with the things that matter, that are the hardest and sometimes the most difficult. That's your job. That's your role. I've enjoyed our time together this summer. We'll meet last time next week, where you will present your case studies. And I don't want to have to say a word. I want them to be so great that I'm the most silent person on next week. Anybody have anything for the good of the group before we go? I'll see you next Wednesday. Everybody have a good week. Thank you.